Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair is the latest platforming adventure from Playtonic Games, a studio comprised of ex-members of Rare Games who were responsible for many childhood favorites like Banjo-Kazooie, GoldenEye 64, and of course, Donkey Kong Country. Their first game, Yooka Laylee, was designed to be a throwback to their 3D platformer roots, taking large amounts of inspiration from the Banjo series. It made a huge splash on Kickstarter, at the time being the fastest game to hit $1 million in funding. Unfortunately, upon release, the game was met with mixed reception, and despite steady improvements since release, it is regarded as a disappointment. With Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair, Playtonic have taken another crack at the IP. However, this time, instead of harkening back to Banjo, they've gone even further back in their catalog to pay tribute to another all-time great, Donkey Kong Country. Indeed, Impossible Lair is a 2.5D platformer that borrows many of the mechanics from Nintendo's #1 Gorilla. But does it merely replicate the mechanics of that platforming classic, or did Playtonic succeed in actually pushing the genre forward? Well, let's find out. I don't really think it's fair to do too much of a deep critique on the story in this game, as with most platformers, the narrative is not really the focus and is really just designed to appeal to the young and young at heart. Basically, the villainous capital B from the first game is up to no good, and Yooka and his baddie pal Laylee are tasked with taking down CB's Impossible Lair. To do this, they must rescue Queen Phoebe's royal guard, the Battalion. Yeah, it's a bonkers storyline, but it's adorable, and the world of Yooka Laylee is full of likable, googly-eyed characters, like a cannon named Blasty, these sentient shopping carts, and a greedy snake named Trouser. The snake's name is Trouser. Bruh. It's a cute story that adds just enough motivation for playing the game, can't really ask for more and can't really ask for less. Also, is it just me or does Capital B look like the love child of Gru and Homer Simpson? As said earlier, Impossible Lair is a 2.5D platformer that takes most of its inspiration from the Donkey Kong Country series. This is most evident in the duel's roll attack, which looks and feels identical to Donkey and Diddy's roll attack from the older and newer games. As expected, you also jump, climb, and swim throughout the game's 40 levels. You start each level with both Yooka and Laylee, whom, when together, can roll faster and longer and can also do the buddy slam, which is sometimes key for accessing hidden areas. If the player takes damage, this will cause Laylee to start frantically flying away, giving the player a short amount of time to retrieve her. If she does manage to fly off, this does leave Yooka with a slower roll and unable to do the buddy slam. Plus, one more hit and it's game over. The game's mechanics all feel tight and responsive and call for precision and fast reflexes from the player, as it should be in any good platformer. But well-executed mechanics can only be appreciated with strong level design, and fortunately, Impossible Lair shines in this department, with expertly designed levels chock full of secrets that strike that all-too-important balance of fun and difficulty. Adding to this are the various colored feather challenges in each level which, if completed, award the player with bonus quills, the game's main form of currency. This is also along with the hidden Twit coins, which we'll talk about in a bit. All of this provides a worthy challenge for platforming veterans, but is also accessible enough for newer players. There's not really much to complain about, but if I did have one thing to say, it's that I wish there was some type of co-op gameplay. A lot of the joy of the old Donkey Kong games was going through it with another player. I can understand if it's a bit more challenging to figure out how to make a small bat be playable compared to a small chimpanzee, but I think this would be a good thing for Playtonic to work on if they choose to make another Yooka Laylee follow-up in this style. Also, if I'm being honest, there's a good amount of levels that are just too long. Short and sweet is my preference for these types of games. It would be more of an issue if the game had a lives system or had sparse checkpoints, but luckily it doesn't, so it's more of a slight annoyance rather than a hard critique. Levels are accessed in the game's Overworld, which is depicted from a top-down perspective. It's not merely a means of going from level to level, but is actually one of the main pillars of gameplay, featuring numerous puzzles and secrets for the player to find whilst exploring. It's also where the player interacts with the game's colorful cast of characters. Levels are depicted as storybooks, and each has a battalion to collect along with 5 hidden Twit coins. Twit coins are needed to get past Trouser Snake's paywalls, which when fulfilled open up new areas of the map, making them a necessity to collect. His name is Trouser Snake. Now here's where things get pretty neat. See, each storybook actually contains multiple variations of each level depending on how the environment is affecting the storybook. So, if you freeze a storybook, it turns into a snow level. If you flood a storybook, it transforms into a water level. Pour a pot of honey on this book, and now the level is sticky icky icky. Playtonic did an excellent job making sure each variation feels distinct. I mean, they're effectively completely new levels along with their own battalions to collect and twit coins. This brings us around to the puzzle elements in the overworld, as solving these usually unlocks new level variations. I like this a lot. It's a very clever bit of design and helps Yooka Laylee stand out. One last element in exploring the overworld is collecting the tonics. When found, tonics serve as gameplay modifiers that cause the levels to be easier or harder depending on how the player chooses to use them. So for example, a tonic I used often made Laylee take longer to fly away if I got hit, while another made Yooka's climbing faster. Most others strengthen abilities you already have, like being able to roll faster or dash faster underwater. The rub is when you use a tonic to make the game easier, it subtracts from your quill bonus multiplier, meaning less quills at the end of a level. On the flip side of that though, using tonics to make things harder will add to the multiplier. These tonics are things like taking away all but one checkpoint in a level or giving the enemies an extra hit point. Rounding these out are the cosmetic tonics, which don't affect the multiplier at all and are just there for fun. These are things like changing the color palette to make the game look like a black and white movie or an old Game Boy game. Another makes Yooka look more human, for some reason. Unfortunately, some of these tonics, specifically the ones that alter the color palette, can actually negatively affect the game's performance. The Game Boy tonic, for example, tanks the game's frame rate and actually makes the game laggy. Same with the art film tonic. It's a bummer, as I'd be more willing to play around with these if they weren't so problematic. While the tonic system is a nice addition to the game, I can't help but feel like it could have been pushed a lot further. The extra help they can provide can be nice, but it never feels like an absolute necessity. It would have been better if they actually granted the duo new abilities besides their default buddy slam. Tonics that add more challenges are a fun diversion, but pretty much go from slightly harder, like giving enemies an extra hit point, to ludicrous gimmicky hard, like reversing the game's controls. When you look at it honestly, you have a bunch of tonics that affect the game in mostly unmemorable ways, and a bunch of goofy cosmetic changes that aren't really anything to write home about and actually affect the game negatively. The final thing to talk about is, of course, the game's titular Impossible Lair. Impossible Lair is the game's ultimate final level. Is it impossible? No. Is it really difficult? Yeah. Interestingly, it can be accessed at any time from the overworld, but the chances of you actually beating it early on is incredibly slim. This level is a freaking monster, testing every skill you have with every cheap and dirty obstacle to keep you on your toes. Let me tell you, I was screaming all manners of filth at my TV for this one, and the only games that make me swear are Souls games and Overwatch. I mean, look at this nonsense. There are no checkpoints, and if you die, you pretty much have to start all the way back at the beginning, and trust me, this level is lengthy. So how can you even beat this thing besides being an absolute gaming god? Well, that's where the battalion comes into play. Collecting the game's 48 battalion is not just an arbitrary means progression. No. Each of these battalion provide Yooka and Laylee a free hit in the Impossible Lair, meaning when you do take on the level, you can have 48, or actually 50 if you count the duo, hit points until you die. I love this concept as it actually makes the amount you choose to complete in the game directly affect the chances of you actually being able to beat it. Imagine if a Mario game worked this way. You'd probably be way more motivated to collect those stars, shines, and moons, wouldn't you? Once again, let me stress, the Impossible Lair is not impossible. It will take you a few tries to beat, even with a full battalion. But once you do, don't feel guilty about patting yourself on the back, because that is an accomplishment. Yeah, Yooka Laylee is a pretty good looking game. It's vibrant, colorful, the character models are well done and animated. Initially playing, I assumed Playtonic built the game in Unreal, but as it turns out, it was made in Unity. Not that there's anything wrong with Unity, but props to the developer for getting this much out of it. You notice a few blemishes here and there, like graphical glitches, but nothing to get all up in arms about. Plus, the game runs like an absolute dream. I don't think I ever noticed a frame rate dip besides the times I would turn on a color filter. Levels feel dynamic and alive. Look close enough off and you'll see all sorts of goofy little details in the background, like a capital B scarecrow. Finally, the sound design is also very strong, with the soundtrack being a particular highlight. The soundtrack is full of catchy but somewhat chill tunes that are definitely good for a head bop or two, but certainly remain in the background of the action. It also reminds me of some of the songs in Donkey Kong Country, which is not unexpected but appreciated. Say what you want about the first game, but Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair is one of the finest platformers around, at least at the moment. It focuses on what every good platformer should: tight mechanics and good level design. But the new ideas it does introduce, like the puzzle overworld and the level variations, keep the game fresh and interesting. It's the DNA of what made Donkey Kong Country so good, but appropriately updated and expanded upon for modern day gaming. So, if you love the classic style platformers, then I would say this is a no-brainer. And if you're still a bit sour on the first Yooka Laylee, well, I'd say give this one a shot. It might just surprise you.